remember watching My So-Called Life as a teen, and I remember loving that show. Initially, I didn't know why I liked it so much, because it seemed like a very cliche story about an angsty teen girl with a no one gets me attitude. But as I kept watching it, I realized why. It was realistic. I never once questioned the reality of the high school or the teenagers on that show. Even though they were fictional, this show was truly way ahead of its time, and it tackled so many issues and topics that were never talked about. The feelings this show gives me are so precious, and I recommend you to watch it if you haven't. It's hard to overstate the impact of My So-Called Life and the long shelf life that it had, considering it only had one season. No other show has ever captured the daily angst and passions of a teenage life with as much honesty and intensity as this one. It has inspired an obsessive cult following since its initial run, with strongly devoted followers and critics, often labeling it as one of the greatest cult shows of all time. The appeal of the show is credited to the solid acting by the entire cast and the excellent writing by Winnie Holzman. I could talk about all the little things I love about the show, but then we'd be here for hours. So instead of talking about the episodes, let's talk about the characters. The show revolves around the character of Angela Chase, her new friends Rayanne and Rickie, her intense crush Jordan Catalano, and her childhood friends Brian and Sharon. Let's start with her friend group. Rayanne Graff is the rebel who hides her insecurities behind fake bravado and booze. She is the intense wild girl. Most schools always have one. She was voted most slut potential in her sophomore class, and tends to date scumbags, security guards, and guys who are generally too old for her, but never for very long. She loves to drink, and once had her stomach pumped after nearly ODing. After that, she stayed clean and sober for over a month, but fell off the wagon hard after a disastrous attempt at singing lead vocals for Jordan's band, Frozen Embryos, which is a very cool name by the way. Her mom treats her more like a friend than a mother, sometimes not being a very responsible mother by giving Rayanne way too much freedom. This is probably because Rayanne's father left them when she was very young. It's like her mom got stuck in her teenage days since. Friends are very important to Rayanne, specifically Angela and Rickie, both of whom she watches out for, even though she can't even take care of herself. Rayanne expresses a lot of desire to be like Angela, and worries about being a major disappointment to her, and that precisely happens after she drunkenly slept with Jordan Catalano in his car. She feels an immense sense of guilt over her actions, and makes multiple attempts to try and gain Angela's friendship back. Although Angela managed to make amends with Jordan, Rayanne never reconciles with Angela before the series finale. Rickie was raised by his uncle, who physically abused him. When his uncle kicks him out of the house, he becomes homeless and struggles to find a place to stay. Rickie definitely has the most tragic story of all of the characters. Rayanne and Rickie were friends before Angela came into their group. Rickie always feels protective over Rayanne and goes to great lengths to try and cover up or take the blame for Rayanne's substance abuse.
Did you ever try to protect someone so much that it hurt?
He continuously tries to keep Angela and Rayanne's friendship intact throughout the series, but isn't always successful. Many people don't realize the importance of Rickie's character. He was the first openly gay teenage character on American network TV. Rickie cares for all of his friends and is generally a great person, all while he struggles to find his place in a world that doesn't accept him.
That I belong nowhere, with no one. That I don't fit.
Out of all the characters, I related to and liked Rickie the most. We can clearly see that he's struggling, but he tries to keep it all to himself, and that reminded me of me. I was never too big on sharing anything bad I was going through to my friends. Rickie is a great guy. He's sensitive, empathetic, and a hopeless romantic. He genuinely cares about his friends and tries to help them whenever he can. Jordan Catalano is a high school junior who was held back 2 years. After getting to know him more, Angela figures out that he can't read, and he may be dyslexic. As a result of his learning disability, Jordan ditches virtually every class. Jordan Catalano is quiet and tends not to talk a lot. He is often made uncomfortable by deep conversation. He is intrigued by Angela, although he thinks she talks way too much and wants to make too many plans. Although what Jordan says might hurt someone's feelings, he is very honest and trustworthy. Jordan is very intelligent, but is embarrassed by his learning disabilities. Instead of admitting to his teachers and peers that he has a difficulty, he projects an attitude that he doesn't care about his lack of achievement or how others feel. There's a hint of depression and a general disappointment Jordan has with his life, which is probably why he's interested in Angela. To him, she's a breath of fresh air. I think that the two of them definitely work better as friends. They didn't have that much in common, and I'm sorry, but Jordan was a really terrible boyfriend. When we look at Jordan's home life, we can understand more about his character. He tells Rickie that he used to get a beating from his father before he fought back and threw a chair at him. It makes sense why he doesn't even try to improve his situation. No one in his life ever noticed or cared to help except for Angela and Mr. Racine. It's sad because you can tell that Jordan really has some potential. For the most part, he'll probably end up working in the garage for the rest of his life. But maybe if he tries to change and put in some work, he might have a future. Brian, or Brain, as Jordan likes to call him, is Angela's childhood friend. He's a straight-A student and an overachiever who happens to be secretly in love with Angela. Every scene we see Brian, he's alone with no friends. We never see him talking to anyone other than Angela, who usually just needs something from him. Only in the later episodes we see him forming a friendship with Rickie and Jordan. In the Christmas episode, he unknowingly opens up to Rayanne about his loneliness, and for the first time, we get to see him struggling. Brian is definitely not perfect and can do some really bad things, like spreading a rumor that Angela slept with Jordan. In the Life of Brian episode, the mental monologue is perfect, revealing surprising layers to him. He's intelligent and surprisingly perceptive, but even more surprising is his complete ineptness when it comes to relationships in general. Brian is a social outcast by his own actions. His shyness and his fear of rejection tend to get in the way. Brian is especially unskilled at dealing with romantic situations, or a lack thereof. He was given the chance to have a romantic relationship with Delia, but his selfish stupidity completely blew that chance. Watching this disaster play out is horribly painful. And of course, the main example of Brian's romantic hopelessness. He has an enormous crush on Angela but does nothing about it, except show up at her house frequently with a lame excuse. He is so in love with her to the point where he is willing to ghostwrite a letter to her. But then, when she finds out that it was him, he tries to lie about it. Angela does figure out it was him, but she still chooses to be with Jordan. Poor Brian. Sharon is sociable and outgoing. She's popular and cares about her family and friends. Sharon and Angela used to be the very best of friends, but ever since Angela started hanging out with Rayanne and Rickie, that completely changed. Sharon doesn't get why Angela just dropped her. Because of that, she is rightfully angry and frustrated, even though she was sometimes awful to Angela by talking behind her back and spreading the rumor that Brian started. It's clear that she loves and cares deeply for Angela. In the episode where her dad has a heart attack, she and Angela eventually have a heartfelt conversation and reconcile their differences. Graham originally worked for Patty at her family's business. He was not truly happy because he always dreamed of becoming a chef, so Patty fired him so he could chase his dreams. He almost committed adultery, and by the end of the season, we see him on that path again. It's very difficult to reconcile how I feel about Graham because he's a really good dad and he seems to genuinely care about his family, but he keeps repeating the same mistakes. Patty was the homecoming queen of her class. She was very popular and pretty that she did not even know Graham, who went to the same high school. She was such an important figure that the prom was postponed when she was absent due to her appendix being removed. She runs a printing company, and during her time as a mother, Patty struggles with her marriage, business, and dealing with her adoptive parents. She cares for everyone around her, even Rayanne, who she disliked initially because of her bad influence over her daughter. Later, she reveals to Angela that she had a roommate in college who died of a drug overdose, which is partly why she cares and wants to help Rayanne to get better. Now to the show's main character, Angela Chase, a 15-year-old on the verge of her sophomore year of high school. She's at that point where she's desperate to redefine herself. herself, and as a result, she's making some big changes, including pushing aside her former best friend Sharon and dyeing her hair red. She starts to befriend Rayanne and Rickie to escape the boring suburban life she's been living.
It just seems like you agreed to have a certain personality or something. For no reason. Just to make things easier for everyone. But when you think about it, I mean, how do you know if it's even you?
Angela thinks deeply about everything. She's hyper-aware and sensitive, often daydreaming about things like the strangeness of eating in public and ways of getting her crush's attention. Angela's introspective inner dialogue made her a complex character with depth. Angela is a teenager who is best at being average. She is neither a burnout nor a wallflower. Her catalyst is her best friend Rayanne Graff, who is kind of the complete opposite of Angela, an outspoken, sexually active, damaged wild child. She fits right at Angela's side. She motivates Angela and at times helps her get into trouble so that she can feel quote-unquote alive. In fact, Angela says, "If I hadn't started hanging out with Rayanne, I would die or something." But after Rayanne's overdose, Angela starts to see Rayanne as more than just a wild girl and develops negative emotions about their friendship. When it comes to her relationship with Jordan, which starts at a very rocky point, it's possible to imagine it would end badly. Jordan's hot and cold. He makes out with her, then ignores her in front of his friends. He wants to meet her parents, then doesn't show up. He tries to sleep with her, then says he doesn't have any real interest in her. He also tried to pressure her into having sex and accused her of being abnormal when she refused. In the last scene, when Angela gets in the car with Jordan, knowing that Brian wrote that letter, part of her knows she shouldn't get in his car, but she does anyway. She's young and doesn't know better, so she's accepting whatever form of love she can get. It's somewhat sad. We all know she's making the wrong decision, but it's her decision to learn from. Angela's not always likable. She can sometimes be a jerk with her family and friends, but she always apologizes and tries to make things right. She's the kind of girl that's hard to define. I can relate to her a lot because I never belonged to a single clique in high school. Instead, I just talked to one person from each clique that I liked. She doesn't really belong in any specific category, and she's always trying to find out who she is. And I feel like we're very similar on that note. The show was really great. Not many teen dramas attempt to capture what it's like to be a teenager without the filter of nostalgia like Freaks and Geeks, or exaggerated elements of excessive wealth like Gossip Girl. My So-Called Life, however, did, and it usually did it very well. No show could reflect the air of meaninglessness that is intertwined through adolescence, that sense that you're just biding time, waiting for something to happen. While My So-Called Life wasn't a rating giant by the standards of the 90s, it did have a devoted following and became one of the first shows whose fans launched an online campaign to save it from cancellation. Holzman, the creator of the show, said, "This was a show about adolescence, and it sort of ended in its own adolescence. There was an aura about how short the series was. Like all things that die young, My So-Called Life also portrayed realistic and compelling friendships, seen best in Angela's and Rayanne's relationship. The storylines were real. The dialogue was realistic in a way teen dramas never got to be, and its cast looked like average people, or at least as average as Claire Danes and Jared Leto can look. It was supposed to be about one suburban Pittsburgh kid's crummy life, but yet somehow everybody wanted to be Angela Chase. The characters are beautifully complicated. The teenagers were not comprised of lazy high school stereotypes such as the nerd, the stoner, the jock, and the slut. They're complex compositions of you and me and everyone we know, like us. Their problems are not addressed and fixed in one episode. They linger. The angst, arrogance, self-consciousness, and confidence of adolescence are all very well scripted. There was a genuine affection and respect for the characters being conveyed that makes them beautiful, even in the most simple, meaningless moments.